Good afternoon. This is David and my buddy Abe. He's ready to go. I'm ready to go. We're about to start talking about the Civil War era. Here we go. Thank you for coming back today. We actually have a lot of new friends today. Lincoln, can you go sit down on your desk? Yeah, sure. All right. We're going to talk about the Civil War era and the content and the context therein. And I am joined, as always, by the amazing Heather, who is off camera to help out in the chat. This is exciting. Now, the thing that we're going to do today is very similar to what we've been doing. And so for those of you who are new, what we are going to be doing is we're going to look at kind of how this test has changed and try to approach some questions based on that. And so it's not just about content. It's not just about knowing multiple choice and all of that. It's also about knowing how to do short answer and do questions like that. And so today we're going to approach things to where you're getting the basic, like, make sure you know this stuff, but also how could that manifest on test day? So for those of you who have not heard all of the news, we do have a real quick synopsis of that right here. This is what the College Board has said thus far. And again, if you were here for the other sessions since we found that out, this won't take very long. The tests are going to be from home. They're going to be 45 minutes long. They're cutting the last fifth of the class off. What that means for US history is not topics. They're not getting rid of topics, they're getting rid of time. So basically you are going back in time and taking the history test that I took in school where nothing happened after World War II. That's not true, but that's kind of how it's being presented. So Korea, Vietnam, 9/11, none of that is going to be covered. But the topics are still going to be covered. Now, as far as what type of questions, we don't know. April 3rd, next Friday, the College Board is going to be announcing what exactly they're going to be asking, like the kinds of questions they're going to be asking. But for now, all we know is that they are going to be free answer, no multiple choice, so that cheating is cut down on. There is going to be, starting tomorrow on College Board, there are going to be actual courses running on the AP Classroom site, taught by AP teachers around the country. So you can watch those. I believe they run in the afternoon after our sessions or in the morning before our sessions. So you can still come see us because we aren't really covering the same stuff as them. We're talking about how to turn that content into a written answer. Okay. So yeah, that's the breaking news, which was breaking on Friday, but we're still breaking it. As far as topics go, these are the 8 topics. Now we already have covered the first 4 in our sessions. And I believe that those are all available, that you can go back and watch those. If you go to the go to the Kaplan YouTube page, where this is also hosted, you can watch these other sessions. This one is one session, and then this one was one, and then this one was one, and this is today. And then the rest of the week we'll cover out the last 3. So all of the streams are there. You can go back and watch any of them that you want. This is awesome. We're glad you're here. So moving right into Civil War context. To get one of the big things that I preach in these classes is connecting the streams, connecting the strings, connecting the themes. I meant to say themes and strings, which turned into streams, which is, you could say that too, but that's not exactly what we were talking about. So finding the string, the thread that goes through history. The decisions that were being made back in the 1700s, the early 1800s, were never settling issues. When they talked about the 3/5 compromise back early on in the life of the country, that didn't settle anything. That's the one thing with compromises, is that they only usually work for a little while, for a short period of time, and then they have to be revisited. And so when you're dealing with those, eventually somebody's not going to be happy with that arrangement. And so each time that started, there would be a new negotiation and a new compromise and a new set of people that weren't happy and a new conflict and all of that. And each time it was like, we're not going to solve the problem. We're just going to ignore it. We're going to paper over it. We're going to paint it with a different color. We're ignoring the leaky ceiling. We're just going to put tape over it. And then we're going to put spackle over it. We're not actually going to fix the roof where this leak is coming in. And so eventually it's going to burst. And that's exactly what all of this is. You can almost feel it happening as you're going along. So the Missouri Compromise in 1820, it held for over 3 decades, but it did not solve the problem at all. And in 1854, the KansasNebraska Act basically repealed the Missouri Compromise, and then the Republican Party forms. Now, you got to keep, even though some of the names are the same, the positions are not. And so just because it says Republican Party, that is not a direct connection to our Republican Party now. So if you look at our Republican Party now and you look at what makes up their platform, that's not going to match the Civil War Republican Party. So the names do shift at times and the stances shift. And you may actually see a party that stand for something completely opposite now. It just depends on how the party makeup votes at that point. But at that point, the Republican Party forms. So the Compromise of 1850, this is in between Missouri Compromise and KansasNebraska Act. It admits California as a free state. The Mexican secession turns into New Mexico and Utah. Popular sovereignty was what was given out there, which basically meant that the members were going to decide, the citizens would decide whether or not slavery would be allowed or not. Slave trade in Washington, D.C. is canceled. It's banned, but not anywhere else. And you can almost see, like, each time something is done, every step that's done, there's got to be like a matching step that the other side likes. And so slave trade in Washington, D.C. is banned, but the Fugitive Slave Act is made more strict. And so what that means, Fugitive Slave Act, for those of you who need a refresher on that, is going to be where you cannot interfere with somebody trying to take back their fugitive slaves. But the other thing is that you don't know which ones are fugitive slaves, because basically any Black person could be seen as a fugitive slave, and oftentimes were treated like one, even if they weren't. And so that more strict Fugitive Slave Act, the South wanted that, and the North was mortified that it passed. Texas basically got bought off. They got paid off to drop its claim to part of New Mexico. And then we call this the Great Triumvirate. These are pre-Civil War politicians, Clay, Calhoun, and Webster. Those are definitely names to know. They are definitely names to know. And they all have influences. And they do try to keep things kind of at ease, at peace for a while. But, it doesn't work for a long term. So here are some questions to test content here. So what we're going to do on each of these questions is I'm going to give you a minute to work on them. Think about it, go back through your brain power and all that, and then vote in the chat for what you think. And then we will move on to the next one. I'm going to give you 30 seconds for each of these, because it's really, you know it or you're not working it out. So there's nothing to read, there's a map. But I do want you to remember that you got to pay attention to everything, okay? You got to pay attention to everything when they ask you a question, when they show you a graphic. Make sure you read it, okay? So here we go, number 3, sorry, go for it. Okay. The one big thing I want to make sure that you're paying attention to, it says the proportion of free slaves and free enslaved states shown on the map, directly led to. So these are key because they'll say most likely caused or most significantly caused or whatever. Look at the map. 1854. This is an 1854 map. So make sure you're paying attention to which states are there now at that point. And it is going to be answer choice B, led to the formation of the Republican Party. It is because of this, this breakdown, the way things are. So this would be after the Compromise of 1850. Most directly, it led to the formation of the Republican Party. So if it had been a map of 1840, you would have probably had a different answer. Okay. All right, here we go. Number 4. So again, 30 seconds for number 4. Put your answer into the chat. Okay. Texas was a source of conflict for all of the following reasons, except. Anytime you see except or not or something like that, you can pay attention to it, okay, on multiple choice questions. I'll just tell you that for any standardized test, even though there won't be multiple choice questions on this test. Other tests, don't mess that up. So what was the source of conflict? They're not all going to be conflict. Texas didn't cause all the conflicts, just some of them. And so in this case, it's going to be the rejection of the Compromise of 1850. If you remember what we just looked at on the Compromise of 1850, was the fact that Texas was fine with it. They didn't necessarily like it, but they took the money and they were okay. And so they didn't reject the Compromise of 1850. The other things, yeah, they had disputed borders. They did apply for annexation, which did cause conflict. They refused to abide by Mexican laws, which led them to applying for annexation and caused conflict. But they didn't have a problem with the Compromise of 1850. Okay? Number 5. So the Compromise of 1850 and the KansasNebraska Act were, go ahead, another 30 seconds. Remember what we were talking about, compromises, these different acts, they did not fix things for long. And in fact, oftentimes it would make things a little bit worse. So when you see something like resolved, that's clearly not it. But it is going to be answer choice A, as most of you are saying, more conflict came from those events because no one was happy with them. And so both sides were irritated. Okay, good. Number 6, last one on this. Opponents of the KansasNebraska Act, which would they have supported? Okie dokie. The answer would be answer choice B, a free soil position, which is basically going to be where the citizens could decide what they wanted to do. Okay, so the Kansas-Nebraska Act, they would want the people, the citizens of each state, to be able to decide. Great. All right, so we've moved past Kansas-Nebraska. We've moved past the Compromise of 1850. That was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, what we just talked about. So now they're like, okay, the new states, they can decide if they're going to have slavery or not. And so what happens? A whole bunch of people flood Kansas to vote. Well, that's not exactly what people were wanting, because you had abolitionists from the north flooding in, claiming to be citizens. You had slavery people from other areas coming in. And so now that neither of them are actually citizens of the state, their fighting breaks out. There's all kinds of problems about how do we know? What should we do? There's fighting, there's killing, there's terrible, not a good thing. Kansas comes in as a free state. Each one of these is like every single time they're coming closer and closer and closer to causing problems. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the big thing to remember was that popular sovereignty. It was that when new states were coming in, so there were groups of people who wanted new states to come in and automatically be free states. Other ones wanted it to automatically be slave states. Others were trying to use the Mason-Dixon line to determine if it's north of that or south of that. But then we started admitting states that were not above or below the line. They were like in the middle of the line. So then they were trying to stop any westward expansion states from being slave states. So then they were saying, okay, the people inside of each state should be able to decide what they are going to be. So that's what the Kansas-Nebraska Act basically said, was that new states were going to be admitted based on popular sovereignty, which would be that the citizens would vote and decide. That immediately led to Bleeding Kansas, because instead of it just being the citizens that voted, it was like people tried to rig the election basically, and they started fighting. And that was what happened immediately after the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Then came the Dred Scott decision, in which case that Missouri Compromise in 1820 that had been surviving for quite a long time was basically overthrown and ruled unconstitutional by saying that it doesn't matter if they are north or south, a slave is still a slave, which basically says there is no such place as a free state for a Black person. And Dred Scott, who was free and up in the north, they said, he escaped and he would have been free because he was in the north. They're like, no, you can't do that. And so they said he's still a slave. And so the Missouri Compromise was overthrown, which it was not doing a great job holding things together at the first place. And so now that Band-Aid got ripped off and we start to have another big problem. John Brown, Harper's Ferry. John Brown is going, he's a Northerner, he's an abolitionist. He's an abolitionist. He goes and raids, and he is killed. He becomes a hero to the North. He's seen as the kind of thing that the North is going to do to the South, where the South is like, hey, this is what we have to expect. They're going to come and take our stuff. They're just going to come and do it by force. And so now that ramps up the fear in the South, and it shows the North that they are going to be there are going to be some people up there that are not taking this anymore, and they just want to go. They're going to go and fight. So I noticed some people are asking stuff like, why are we going over multiple choice questions and stuff like that? So let me just mention why we're doing that. We've redone all of our slides since they announced things on Friday. So it's not that we're just wanting to leave things in there because we're not wanting to change them or anything. The way that this test is, the exact structure of the test is not known. All we know is that the answers are going to have to be student generated. But they need to know that you understand content. They need to know that you know the minimum stuff for the test. So what they are going to have to do is ask you questions that reveal that. So you still need to know the content. If anything, you need to know it better because there's not any multiple choice answers to give you any guidance. And when it comes to, we do have some questions coming up talking about how this is going to manifest itself into those student generated answers. You're going to see that some of them are like, name one event that does this. Well, you got to pull that event out of your brain. And it's like, you have to know a lot of events. So we want to make sure you understand when they say Missouri Compromise, what does that mean? When they say Texas, the KansasNebraska Act, what does that mean? When they say Dred Scott, like that, immediately what it is. So studying content and studying multiple choice is actually still a great way to make sure you've got those facts down for when they ask you other questions. So that's why we still are doing them, is because I want to make sure that you know these important points that build the structure of what is happening. Okay, so then we get to the 1860 election, the presidential election in 1860. This is the death knell for the country as a whole. There are open threats in the South that if Lincoln wins, they are going to secede. It really kind of comes down to a straight along North and South lines, free states versus South slave states. You have a couple of people that pull enough electoral votes out that it does affect things. I mean, if you look at how many Bell has and you look at how many Douglas has, if those were added to the South, things are going to be a lot tighter. But in the end, Lincoln does carry the election, and immediately, South Carolina, where I live, didn't pick that because of any ties, just saying. South Carolina was the first one out, and then they were followed quickly by several others. And so that is going to be the final, it's the straw that broke the camel's back at that point. It's the final step. So why was it at that point at 1860 where it was going to be inevitability? The thing is that there was no way for them to heal things. Things had gone on for too long that they were not. There's no way that those two could come back and be like, all right, we're fine now. The South, they're in charge of the judicial branch. They are more Southern leaning judges, as evidenced by things like the Dred Scott case. They're running the legislative branch, but not as much as they used to be. And what the South is sitting here seeing is this is about to be really bad for us. Like, the writing was on the wall. They knew that in a very short order, they were not going to be in power anymore. The GOP ran on a grounds of, we are not going to expand slavery. What's there? If you've got a slave state, yeah, that's fine, but we're not putting any more in. And the South did not believe the assurances from Lincoln that we don't want to roll it back. We just want to stop it where it's not. That was what Lincoln ran on. That's what he said, was that we weren't going to make slavery illegal. We were just going to say that no new state could have it. The only states that could have it were the ones who already did. And the states in the South didn't believe him, probably with good reason. So as far as like, I'm seeing some questions too about like the actual test. No one knows. No one knows exactly what it's going to be. All we know is what the College Board has said. The College Board has said, so just make sure, listen to what I'm saying. All right. Don't get involved in like everyone's rumors in the chat or whatever. Just listen to what I'm saying. The College Board has said it is a 45-minute test. They have also said there are no multiple choice. They said that in a tweet. So there are no multiple choice. It is a 45-minute test. All of the questions are going to be student-generated response. Multiple choice questions are still extremely valid for studying's sake, because that means that they are going to, it's going to help you to get content down for the free response questions, okay? So you don't have to stop studying multiple choice. You don't have to stop studying content, because otherwise you're not going to know how to answer free response questions, okay? All right, so we've got a couple of more multiple choice questions, which this is going to then lead into some free response stuff, okay? So let's start with number 7. Number 7, there's a cartoon there and a question asking which of these most directly led. So let me give you a minute to work on that. Good luck. All right, number 7, which of the following most directly? Most directly. So it's basically something happened, then the secession happened. So all of these things led ultimately to the secession, but the one that led immediately to it was going to be the presidential election of 1860. As soon as Lincoln won, it was like, Lincoln won, South Carolina's, see, all right, I'm out of here. All right, I'm heading out. South Carolina's gone as soon as that happened. So that was the most direct. It was like one step removed. Number 8, which of the following, so we hear that a lot. Like, we know that. South Carolina is like, we're gone. But what was their justification? What was our justification for it? That's the interesting thing, is maybe we don't know that. And actually, that's going to be something that would be more likely to pop up in a free response question, because we would have to draw the thread. So let's go ahead and answer that one, and then we'll talk about it. So what was the justification for the secession? And I see quite a few of you actually are getting it, and that is answer choice C, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. This was like, they like hauled out an old school piece of legislation to talk about this. This was not like a recent thing. This is like back in 1780 something, where they said we formed the union as a contract, and basically you violated that contract. We joined knowing that state rights were still a thing and that we still could have what we felt was the right thing. And now you are threatening that. And so we're out. So it was the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. And that, honestly, by the way, if you're hearing barking or explosions, that is thunder. We are having a major storm coming through here, and my dogs are going crazy over the thunder, and it is very, very loud. So I am sorry for that, but there's not a whole lot I can do to control the storm. I don't have that skill. I'm not an X-Man. So there we go. Number 9. Number 9, the Compromise of 1850. This is a good check to make sure that you know what all was included in that compromise. So let's take a minute, think through that, and vote. Okay, so knowing what a part of the Compromise of 1850 was, this is important. Remember, there was the stricter Fugitive Slave Act. Utah and New Mexico were created. California did come in as a free state, but the slave trade was only banned in DC, nowhere else. And so they did not ban it in Virginia and Maryland, only in the District of Columbia. That's the one difference in this list. All right. So here we are. I told you we were going to get to short answers. So we've gone through and we have looked at Missouri Compromise. We've looked at the Compromise of 1850. We've looked at the secession itself. We've reviewed all of that content. And so now this is something that you may have to do something like this on test day. There are going to be 2 passages right here, and they're going to ask us to compare and contrast them. Okay, so we're going to look at this. We're going to look at the passages, the quotes or whatever. We're going to look at what's being asked in the questions, and then we're going to look at some possible answers that we can put in. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you time to read this. And so I'm going to give you, based on what timer I've got, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read through this. And then we're going to go through and look at each question and then also kind of think through each of those. So take 2 minutes to read H.G. Wells's quote and Schlesinger's quote, and then we will be back and talk about like the different positions that are being taken. All right, so read it and we'll be back. Okay. So hopefully you had time to read that. And was that an obnoxious, like, was that a terrible, obnoxious thing to have to read? Yes. It was awful. It was terrible. I don't understand that era of history. Well, most of it was this era of history, where people felt it was necessary to write in such hoity-toity, like highfalutin language. I'm like, just say what you need to say, you know? In the words of John Mayer, just say what you need to say. But yeah, it's like really weird to try to wade through. And so Wells's basic point, as Tiffany so correctly and concisely told us, the first one talks about there was a couple of things. One, they just were never going to agree. The two sides were just never going to agree at all. They had different views on life. They had different views on everything. And as railways and steamboats made it easier to move between North and South, those two things clashed more and more frequently. It wasn't like you could just, be living somewhere and never have to deal with somebody who doesn't agree with you. Like if you were traveling at all, which was now a possibility, you're going to run into people who don't agree with you. You're going to go north and then they're right there. You could actually tie that to like today, right? With the growth of social media, it's increasingly difficult to isolate yourself to where you don't ever encounter somebody who disagrees. And so how do you deal with that, So Wells is making that point where the more opportunities to interact is going to lead to more opportunities to clash, and they're definitely going to clash. So second, the Schlesinger is going to be that it was all a state rights issue. Everything was a state rights issue. And that it was that as soon as the South is like, this is just states' rights, as soon as they realized their states' rights are going to be usurped, they were done. And that's all it was. Now, here's the thing, is we have to look at history through the eyes of the people who were there. That's a fact. You can't entirely judge history from our point of view because we are in a different place. I'm not saying that what was decided was right or wrong, and I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying those people are making different points. Those people, they are making decisions based on other things. If you go back and read stuff like Lincoln's second inaugural address, slavery was pointed at as the main impetus for the war. Now there are people like Schlesinger who is saying that, oh, it's a states' rights issue. It wasn't really about slavery. I find that hard to believe, Yeah, there was a clash of economies. Yes, agrarian versus industrial. There was a clash of states' rights versus federal. Yes, that was an issue. But those things were not what brought those two sides to war. There was an issue that was the point where the clashes were taking place. And that was slavery. Now, you can attribute slavery as a states' rights issue, but inherently it was, how do you treat this group of people? Or are you not seeing them as people? And that's what it came down to. Now, in here, Wells acknowledges that. Wells is like, they just can't coexist because they have absolutely different ideas. Versus Schlesinger, who's saying, oh, it's all about basically government. Okay. So what you would see is like this has a sample prompt. It's saying that you have to answer all of these questions, all three of them. You don't have to answer them with multiple answers. You just need to have one thing. So one difference between the two of them, one specific event that's not in there that supports Wells, one specific event that's not in there that supports Schlesinger. So we're going to look through each of these at one at a time. Whatever the College Board is asking you to do, it's going to be that you've got to answer all of the prompt. That's always something they're going to require. You're going to need to use correct grammar, full sentences. When they ask for examples, you need historical examples, accurate, specific historical examples. Don't just say, they didn't get along. You've got to find something that proved that, something that demonstrated that, some specific thing. And then not just saying they disagreed because this, but give an explanation of why because this. So all of those things are going to be important. So here we go. First one, differences between Wells and Schlesinger. Throw some answers into the chat. I'm going to give you like a minute to think and to throw some answers in, and then we're going to discuss what a possible response would look like. Okay, so what are some differences? Tell me, what are some differences? We talked a little bit about it, but what are some differences between Wells and Schlesinger's, like clearly stated and spelled out? And so Lena says technology was causing more of a conflict. So like the railroads and all of that, where they are like kind of smashing into each other more often now. Good. And then the second was state and federal. So those are kind of the things we were talking about, that some of the answers had come in, and then that I had also been ranting about. Tiffany, Wells, little possibility of compromise. Good. And then the state power versus, yeah. Schlesinger is a little bit more straightforward as far as what he is saying. Wells actually had a couple of different ideas. So that basically regional ideologies, North versus South, they just had different ways of viewing things. They had different belief systems. And then Schlesinger was more about this states versus federal rights. Okay. So that one, once you really have kind of sifted through the quotes, that one pops out. But this next one I think is a little bit tougher actually, which is a historical event that Wells could use to demonstrate this ideological difference. What would one of those be? Yeah, I'll give you a minute to work on that and punch that into the chat as well. Cool. All right. Specific historical event or development that backs Wells' position that this is just a regional They just don't see each other, they see things the same way. So I mean, that's the thing with stuff like this. There are so many different answers for that. So many different possible answers for that. So you could, like his first point, it depends really on what concept that Wells states that you're grabbing onto. If Wells, if you're looking at the transportation stuff, then you could look at some specific, you know, pieces of transportation, or something that like the Dred Scott case where transportation actually led to that conflict. Another option that you could see is like the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. That's another specific thing that we hadn't really talked about, but it was part of that 1850 decision where you could not interfere with escaped slaves and their recapture. And now all blacks were basically seen as slave until proven free. And so that would be another example. See the KansasNebraska Act. Yep, that's a good one. Industrial Revolution, another good one. John Brown's Rebellion. Yeah, all of those. Fantastic answers. You guys did a great job. Excellent. Cool. All right, let's do the last one then. C. Let's do C. Name one historical event that backs Schlesinger's interpretation. All right, think of one, punch it in there, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so one key thing to notice is that you have to stay within the construct of the prompt. So they're saying 1819 to 1861. So we have to find something that is in the 40 years prior to the Civil War that we could use for Schlesinger. I don't know if I'm even saying that right. So the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, those were in 1780s. So that would not be an event that would fall into this category. So we'd have to be careful to make sure we follow. And that's one of the things to be aware of on the test, is that what specifically are they wanting? And make sure that you answer that. So one thing that you could see was the election itself in 1860, where the federal versus state rights clashed. The South believed that they were not going to be taken seriously any longer, that the stage had been set for the federal government to steamroll what the states wanted. And so they were just like, yeah, okay, this isn't going to work anymore. Tiffany, I think the Dred Scott case would also work here. Yeah, because it was where, well, the Dred Scott case showed how important states' rights were to the judicial branch. So whether or not it would show the threat of those being removed, unless you use that as a way to link the fact that they were losing control of the judicial branch, they could tell they were about to. That might be a way you could twist that. Yeah. Cool. Good job. Yeah, so we covered a lot of stuff today. By the way, let me ask you something just in the last minute or two. How many slaves were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation? Go ahead and tell me that in the chat. How many slaves were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation? This is another thing that I totally could see as a potential short answer question, asking about like what the importance of that was. And because you could see that you have to interpret it a bunch of different ways. And so why you guys are putting that in there is how many people were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. As you're prepping for the test and you're thinking about the Civil War, make sure you're thinking about threads that run from early on all the way through. What topics can we discuss that have multiple points of view or multiple results? Those are going to be great questions because it's going to demonstrate your content knowledge on a variety of areas. Tiffany, Lena, Gabby, 0, exactly, none. No one was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. It applied to the South, which didn't respond to them anymore because it had been seceded. There were no slaves in the North, and then the border states, it did not free them. So it literally freed 0 slaves. A lot of people look at that and they're like, that's the moment the slaves were freed. And it's like, nope, no, it wasn't. And so, but that does, I mean, think about, that's your homework for tonight, is to think about, then what was the point? What did the Emancipation Proclamation do if it didn't free anybody? And so those are some things. I hope we left some good thoughts with you. Tomorrow, we're going to be back and doing some more awesome U.S. history. Hopefully we'll see you then. Thanks for hanging out with us. The top of the hour area, Nick will be back with biology. See you tomorrow.